So last weekend I had some family in town and I wanted to make this savory Thanksgiving leftover pastry. And I tested the recipe, it came out okay, and so I was all set to make it. But then actually later that day that I'd made this sample recipe, I made some chocolate chip cookies. This recipe that I always go to, which is actually a veganized version of the recipe that comes on Trader Joe's chocolate chips. So I made those chocolate chips that evening and I feel like they were a pretty big hit. Everyone seemed to like them. Almost liked them more than the savory Thanksgiving pastry I had made that I was testing. So I decided for this week's video, I would show you how I have made this veganized chocolate chip cookie recipe, which I think is actually the best chocolate chip cookie recipe ever. So let's go ahead and make them. So here I have the wet ingredients. I have a ½ cup of brown sugar, a ¼ cup of granulated sugar, ½ cup of refined coconut oil, 3 tablespoons of Aquafaba or chickpea liquid, and about a ½ teaspoon of vanilla extract. So I'm just adding all these wet ingredients into a bowl. This is just a regular brown sugar. I have a granulated sugar. Make sure it is vegan. Some sugar is made with bone char, so just make sure that your sugar is vegan. Adding the vanilla extract. So this is Aquafaba, this is my egg substitute. It's the liquid that comes in a can of chickpeas. I'm gonna be making a chili later, so it's perfect for this. And I find that in baking, Aquafaba is probably the best egg substitute. You could use flax meal. And the last is the coconut oil. This is a refined coconut oil. If you wanted to have more of a coconut flavor, you could use unrefined, but this really takes the place of butter nicely in terms of consistency, and it kind of just disappears. So I'm just using a hand mixer to mix this together. You could use a fork if you wanted. You just want to get all these ingredients combined. So I've creamed together the coconut oil, the sugar, all of the wet ingredients together. It's gonna whip up slightly depending on the consistency of your coconut oil. It's a little bit more melted or not. Mine is a little bit thicker today than I've normally seen it, but it's gonna work out just fine. If there's a couple small little chunks in there, not a big deal either. So now I'm just gonna add these wet ingredients. Well, let me prepare my dry ingredients and then I'll add my wet ingredients to that. So in this bowl, I already have about 1 cup and 1/8 of flour, just all-purpose flour. Again, this was a halved recipe. The original recipe called for 2 1/4 cups. So to that, I'm adding a ½ teaspoon of salt. This recipe, actually, I think one of the better parts of it is that the salt is pretty high and you can actually taste it a little bit. I'm also adding a ½ teaspoon of baking soda. So I'm just gonna stir these dry ingredients together to get them all incorporated before I add the wet. And I'm pouring in the wet ingredients and then stirring them until they're all combined. And depending on how melted your coconut oil is, it may affect the texture at this point, but it'll all be okay in the end. As you can see, the liquid and the dry have come together, and I'm not going to overmix this. Now it's time for the chocolate chips. So now it's time to add the chocolate chips. Now I find that chocolate chips are kind of a personal thing. I don't like too many, so I'm probably gonna use maybe just like a ½ cup or so. As a kid, I actually hated too many chocolate chips in my chocolate chip cookies. I would sometimes make my mom make me a batch of chocolate chip cookies without the chocolate chips. I just thought they were too overpowering and I liked the cookie part a little bit better. So as I said, I'm going to be making 6 large cookies. This would make a dozen regular size cookies. To make my large cookies, I'm going to be using this scoop, which I measured earlier. It's a number 16. It is a ¼ cup worth of substance when scooped. So I'm going to scoop these out. I might even have a little bit more because this dough is super good that I might save aside and I can eat it because there's no raw egg or anything in there that's going to make me sick. So let's go ahead and scoop these out. All right, so you really want to make sure to pack the dough in there. So I already have my oven preheated to 375 degrees. I'm gonna pop these in. It's gonna take about 15 minutes. Now again, that's because they're the larger size. Probably be a little bit less if you made these smaller. And let's go ahead and put them in. So while these cook, I just want to talk a little bit about the swap outs that I made here. You probably have family recipes for desserts and cookies, baked goods, especially as the holiday season comes up here. You're gonna wanna make those. If you're new to veganism or you're trying to transition, that may be something you feel like you're going to have to give up. But I saw this recipe on this bag, swapped out a few things, and it worked out perfectly. So try it. Try your recipes, try family recipes, things that you liked as a child or things that are your favorites today that you wanna be able to eat when you're a vegan. Just swap out butter for the refined coconut oil. There's a ton of vegan butters you could get. In terms of the egg substitutes, as I said earlier, flax, there's chia egg, there's all these different ways that you can get egg substitutes. I find Aquafaba is really great for these type of baked goods, especially with any quick breads like banana breads, zucchini breads, or pumpkin breads. Aquafaba is definitely the way to do that. Pretty much everything else is standard. The sugar, as long as you make sure your white sugar is vegan, everything else is pretty much the same. And if you make these easy swap outs, you're gonna be able to enjoy all these dishes that you've loved for so long, even after you've gone vegan. So don't be afraid to play, experiment, and if you're like me, experimenting with a recipe on the back of a Trader Joe's bag, you end up making something that's pretty exceptional. So experiment. So it's been about 14 minutes. I'm going to take these out now. And what you're looking for here is for a bit of brown around the edges because it's going to get nice and caramelized. The tops can be a little bit brown, but you don't want them to be too dark. And let's just set these down to cool for a second. So these cookies are actually better the second day. And I know that sounds weird because usually fresh cookies, they're the best fresh hot out of the oven. But because of the coconut oil, they're actually really too loose and delicate to eat right away. But I'm going to trick it and do a little bit of a rush here, and I'm actually going to put these in my freezer for a few minutes before I try to take them off of the Silpat. So I'm gonna do that really quick. All right, so I threw those cookies in my freezer for just about 5 minutes. The reason being that the coconut oil just needs to firm up a little bit, otherwise you're not gonna get these off of the cookie sheet, even if you're using Silpat or parchment paper. So I'm gonna go ahead and take these off and throw them on a plate. So they look a bit firm right now, but it's just the edges are nice and crispy. Inside it's gonna be chewy, gooey, especially right now while the chocolate's still a little bit warm. It's gonna be great. So as a new channel here on YouTube, I'm still trying to figure out my audience. I'm not sure if I'm attracting more new vegans or people that are considering going vegan, or whether I have an audience that's more long-term vegans, people that have been doing this for years. Either way, my goal here is to be able to not necessarily just give you recipes, but to give you tips and tricks and figure out ways to be able to make your life easier while you transition or while you continue to be vegan. So this recipe, it's not about the cookies, it's about the swap outs. And it's about taking little things like the butter out and adding coconut oil, taking the egg out and adding Aquafaba. And just little tricks like that allow you to make your life a lot easier and continue to make the things that you've always made, but now just vegan. So on that, let's go ahead and give these cookies a taste. So I did fake it a little bit by putting these in the freezer, and as I said, they're better the second day. It just gives a chance for that coconut oil to set up, but yeah, throw them in the freezer or the fridge for a few minutes and you're good to go. And actually it's kind of nice because you still have the chips a little bit moist and melted. So I'm gonna give this a taste here. The edges are crispy and caramelized. The inside is still nice and chewy and gooey. It's so good. As I said, the one thing that makes these these cookies so good is the salt. It seems to have like just a little bit too much salt. You read it, but it doesn't read as salty. It just reads as this elevated flavor. And the caramelized edges and the chewy center, it's just so good. So get in your kitchen, play around with recipes that you have, make some swap outs, and you're good to go. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Let me know if there's any swap outs that you're not sure how to make, and I'll try to give some suggestions. Also, if you think that savory Thanksgiving Pop-Tart sounded pretty good, go ahead and leave a comment and I might make that next week as well. So subscribe to this channel, like this video if you liked it, and look at my other videos. I've got about 9 or 10 on there right now, so go ahead and look at my back catalog and make some of those recipes as well. Leave a comment if you do. Follow me on Instagram at MunsonMadeThis, and enjoy the rest of your week. I will see you next Monday with another video.